The French election relates to Israel because both countries face a conflict between forces that are fundamentally anti-democratic and forces that are fundamentally democratic for all their flaws. Macron represents the latter, and the fact that he eked out a victory represents a bullet dodged.
But some of that sort of discontent that's bubbling under the surface about how the EU is getting more and more involved in the issues of each country, immigration, which is probably the #1 thing on the agenda of all of these right-wing nationalist parties, those will continue to bubble under the surface, and perhaps these countries are not providing the citizens with a good enough solution, which is why they're turning to these parties.
Well, I think what a lot of people think is that the EU is not providing them with good solutions, which is why they turn to local nationalists who would keep out the immigrants. And look, that's a legitimate thing. Countries that are ethnicity-based tend to want to remain as such, and that's an issue that has to be resolved. But there will always be tension between the center and the periphery in Europe. The idea of Europe as a supernatural structure, as almost a country like the U.S. as a country, is not one that has wide support, and that's a fact. But I think more acute here is an economic issue. Globalization, technological disruption has left so many people behind in the West as they have seen jobs migrate to poorer countries because labor is cheaper there, that people are unhappy. And they sort of feel like the global elites, perhaps represented by Emmanuel Macron in a more classic way than any other leader currently on stage, have a lot to answer for. There's no doubt about that.
And still with us in the studio here is Dan Perry, former chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem. So Israel now deciding to respond to these rocket attacks by closing the Erez crossing so that some of those Gazan workers won't be able to enter Israel as a type of leverage versus Hamas, a move Israel has done in the past and also been criticized for in the past.
There are times when terrible wars that cause damage to Gaza and bring horrible suffering upon the people of Gaza are something Hamas does not appear to be that eager to avoid because they see some benefit in it. So this little tactical move of preventing some thousands of people from coming into Israel probably will not move the needle on whatever Hamas is attempting to do vis-a-vis Al-Aqsa. It appears as if Hamas wants to stir the stew no less than some elements of the Israeli Arabs, or indeed Jordan and other outside Arab parties that see some profit in pretending like Al-Aqsa is in danger.
Right, and there we have seen Hamas activists there at Al-Aqsa waving Hamas flags even, and Hamas telling the people to go to Al-Aqsa, defend Al-Aqsa, which has always been a major narrative point for them. Now the UN is getting involved, convening the Security Council. Do you think the international community has any role here or can do anything with all of this going on?
If it escalates dramatically, then sure, outside parties might. But right now, the expected calls for calm are not something that I think will make a difference here. The current Israeli government is not likely to be drawn into provocations the way previous ones might have been. I don't think the unrest is being caused by Israeli policy. It's being caused by various Muslim parties that see benefit in vehiculating the lie that Jews want to take over Al-Aqsa. Certainly some Jews do, but that's not something that's really about to happen. So essentially, I pity the poor Muslim youth who end up being dragged into a fake conflict because of criminals whose strategy is to cause mayhem.
You mentioned other parties that are jumping in here. One of the major ones is Jordan, that have basically also reiterated that narrative of Al-Aqsa being in danger, even commended the prime minister and the Jordanian parliament, the activists who throw stones at Israeli security. Do you think Israel has done enough here to kind of sort of rein in that rhetoric from Jordan, and maybe the United States need to get involved in that as well?
They clearly have not done enough, because we see that rhetoric coming from Jordan. I understand Jordan's delicate situation. They have a Palestinian majority in Jordan. Government is not particularly popular, and they have to every now and then wave the Al-Aqsa flag because they are the theoretical custodian. But I am a little disappointed that they should have gone so far as to suggest that they truly believe that the people throwing stones were provoked by a genuine, have a genuine grievance.
Dan Perry, former chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem, thank you very much. And still with us in studio here, Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and the former chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem. So we're seeing here the Ukrainian conflict now entering its third month. People asking when will it end? It's obviously up to Vladimir Putin. Is there a chance that maybe if he gets some sort of result on Victory Day, the 9th of May, that he might call it quits? Or
there obviously is a chance.
Depending on the results also in the field.
Sure, but we're looking at a situation here in which everything depends on one man. Putin decided to start the war. Sure, the Duma pressed him with little demands, but that's basically theater in Russia. Putin decided to start the war, and Putin will decide when the war ends, unless he's otherwise compelled somehow, overthrown or something. So will it be enough for Russia to be able to present some gains, perhaps a little theft of Donbass or a land bridge going through Mariupol to Crimea? Perhaps. There's no question that the Russian economy is being devastated by sanctions. Despite the fact that criticizing the war is illegal in Russia right now will get you sent to Siberia for 15 years, I think there is an increasing sense of people being not so happy with what is going on as the truth slowly comes out, despite their control over media and even social media. So yeah. To answer your question, it's possible. There are two narratives here. One is that Putin wants to seriously reorder the Western European Security Alliance and to challenge the liberal democratic way of life and to be a bigger figure on the world stage, and to perhaps be willing to even use nuclear weapons to achieve those goals. But on the other hand, there's another narrative that says that he is waving that saber in order to have the West feel lucky when all they have to give up is a Donbass region, which, by the way, would not be ridiculous, because the borders of today's Ukraine are based on the old Soviet borders that were purposely engineered to make trouble within these countries. So just like a part of Ukraine was appended to Moldova to make it less Romanian, so Russian regions were appended to the Ukrainian SSR to make it less Ukrainian. And Ukraine is a country already twice the size of Germany, practically. If I was Zelensky, I think I'd be happier without some of these rest of Russian regions where support for, at the very least, autonomy, but quite possibly even transfer to Russia is not small.
Right. Of course, there is a concern that that is rewarding the Russian aggression, and they could operate again, start another campaign another time. But I want to ask you about something else.
It would be, by the way, rewarding Russian aggression. But we live in an imperfect world.
Right. Certainly, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin were expected in Kyiv. Perhaps they're there now. We don't know. Zelensky said he's meeting them. The U.S. haven't commented on that. What do you make of that? I mean, surely there is an issue here of visibility. We've seen Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He was there. The Austrian Chancellor was there. Why are the U.S. hiding here if they're
Boris
there?
Johnson might not have realized he was doing it out in the open. I just don't know about Boris Johnson. But the American modus vivendi in a war zone, and that was this way in Iraq, and it was this way in Afghanistan, and it clearly is this way in Kiev, is to not make this public for security reasons. It doesn't look so swashbuckling. Looks a little meek, in fact, but I certainly understand why, and the last thing anyone needs is Blinken and Austin being caught up in a Russian attack.
And Zelensky, he's been asking for aid, both financially and weapons that he needs in order to keep up the fight against Russia. Surely that's coming up, but is he getting some of those really necessary aid packages that he needs in order to sustain the battle?
The U.S. claims it's given him, $3.4 billion worth of aid. But, the talk is of spare parts for airplanes and artillery and drones. He's not getting planes as he wants. And the U.S. could authorize MiGs that are currently sitting in Poland being sent to him, and that's not happening. He's not getting his no-fly zone, obviously. He's getting visits from Austin and Blinken. So this is all part of a delicate balance where the U.S. and the West wants to be seen as helping Ukraine, wants to help Ukraine, but not to do it so extremely that the Russians can credibly claim the U.S. is now involved.